In today's video, we'll be uncovering 8 real-life cave exploration disasters that took a terrifying turn. From claustrophobic squeezes and unexpected cave floods to eerie discoveries buried deep underground, these stories reveal just how risky and unpredictable spelunking can be. Each tale is a reminder of how quickly a caving adventure can become a fight for survival. So buckle up, let's get into it. And as always, viewer discretion is advised. On May 27, 2008, experienced caver Steve Gladio planned a routine through trip in the Sloan Valley cave system. The goal was simple: enter through the post office entrance at 11 a.m. and exit at the garbage pit entrance by 6 p.m. He would guide 8 novice cavers through one of the region's most impressive underground routes. That morning, 2 of the novices admitted they were too exhausted to continue safely. Steve made the right call and left them at the surface, reducing the group to 7 inexperienced cavers who were about to face a brutal challenge. At 11 a.m., Steve led the team into the 20-foot chimney that marked the post office entrance. The initial descent was smooth, and the group was excited as they explored stunning cave features, including the Fountain of Youth and the big room's north overlook. But as the hours passed, fatigue set in. The constant crawling, climbing, and squeezing through tight spaces began to drain the group's energy. They still had a long way to go. Steve noticed their pace slowing, but there was no turning back now. The route was one way. The only option was to keep moving forward. The cave's challenges were relentless: long crawls, cold water, and sharp, uneven rocks. The novices pushed on, but their strength was fading. Steve's role shifted from guide to motivator, constantly encouraging them to keep going. Every step forward became harder. The underground beauty had vanished. Now it was about survival, making it to the exit before their bodies gave out. Knowing the return trip would take 2.5 grueling hours, Steve made the call to push forward toward their planned exit. But at the big room's south overlook, he hit another obstacle. Someone had cut the fixed bolts that were supposed to provide safe rappelling anchors. Steve didn't hesitate. He rigged a munter hitch and carefully lowered each team member 8 feet to a narrow ledge below. Moving on, Steve spotted something that stopped him cold. The cave's water level was massively higher than normal, 35 feet (10.7 meters) above usual. Passages that should have been dry were now filled with dark, frigid water, transforming their familiar route into a life-threatening challenge. The group crossed thigh-deep pools, the freezing water soaking through their clothes and draining their body heat. They pressed on, successfully navigating the hogback formation, but their relief didn't last. At Echo Junction, the real crisis hit. The bypass they needed, normally a safe route to avoid deep water, was completely submerged. The only path out now was a flooded 175-foot passage with no visible air pockets. Of the 7 cavers, only 2 had fully waterproof headlamps. Without proper lighting, swimming this passage would be suicide. In a moment of incredible bravery, Darren, one of the novices, stepped up. Despite his inexperience, he volunteered to attempt the dangerous swim. Steve secured a 70-foot rope to a dry bag and handed it to Darren. This would be the lifeline the others could follow. Darren knew what was at stake. He entered the freezing water and swam forward into complete darkness, carrying the only chance the group had to survive. The 175-foot passage felt endless as Darren battled the freezing water, each stroke draining his strength. Swimming in full caving gear while towing equipment pushed him to the edge. His waterproof headlamp cut a narrow path through the darkness, but the cold, exhaustion, and rising panic were closing in fast. As Darren neared what he thought was the end, his muscles failed. The cold had taken everything. His desperate cry echoed through the flooded chamber before he slipped beneath the surface, his light vanishing into the depths. Steve didn't hesitate. His lifeguard training kicked in. He dove into the icy water, knowing his non-waterproof headlamp would instantly fail. Now he was swimming blind, navigating by touch alone. When Steve found Darren, the young man was barely conscious, his head bobbing weakly above the water as he gasped for air. Panic had fully taken over. Darren grabbed Steve in a death grip, nearly dragging them both under as instinct replaced reason. Fighting the cold and Darren's frantic grip, Steve used every ounce of strength to push them toward a steep, muddy bank at the side of the passage. When they reached the bank, the danger wasn't over. Darren was showing severe hypothermia, dilated pupils, slurred speech, limp limbs, and worst of all, he had stopped shivering. Steve knew time was critical. He climbed back to the others and directed them to pass all the dry gear and food to Darren immediately. They forced him to eat, drink, and get into dry clothing. Darren's condition was on the edge, but slowly he began to regain strength. Their situation was still dangerous, but Steve had bought them precious time. Now they had to find a way to get everyone out. Steve forced Darren to eat emergency food to generate heat and called to the others to keep him awake and responsive. Leaving Darren in their care, Steve dove back into the flooded passage, pushing toward the lake that led to the cave entrance. His own body was now battling cold exposure. He surfaced and rushed to alert the two novices waiting at camp. Without stopping, he sprinted to a nearby landowner's house and called for a cave rescue team. The first rescuer arrived within 10 minutes, but the situation turned tense. A debate broke out. Should Steve stay and guide rescuers or return immediately to Darren? Steve refused to wait. He grabbed 200 feet of rescue rope, emergency supplies, warm clothes, and a blanket. Packing everything into waterproof bags, he prepared for another brutal swim. 40 minutes after leaving Darren, Steve was back at his side. He immediately began emergency treatment for severe hypothermia. He helped Darren out of his soaked clothing, dried him as much as possible, and got him into warm, dry gear. The emergency food and clothing started to make a difference. Slowly, Darren's body began to respond. The group still faced the same dangerous flooded passage, but thanks to Steve's quick thinking, Darren was stable, alive, and had a chance to survive. Now it was up to the rescue team to get everyone out. The rescue that followed was a true test of skill and endurance. In freezing, chest-deep water, the cave rescue team worked carefully to move Darren across the flooded lake system. Every step was slow and precise. A mistake could send him back into the cold or cause further injury. The rescue took 5 brutal hours. 5 hours of navigating sharp rocks, tight spaces, and frigid water in total darkness. The operation, from the moment Darren vanished to his final exit from the cave, lasted 11 exhausting hours. Without Steve's quick thinking, his lifeguard training, and his refusal to give up, Darren wouldn't have survived. Steve's relentless effort gave Darren the time he needed. On March 29, 2003, the York Grotto Cave explorers gathered at Walmer Cave in Pennsylvania for what was meant to be a routine trip. Mark Engel had organized the expedition, splitting the group into 2 teams to explore different areas. Kevin Dunleavy, a 41-year-old experienced spelunker, led the second team deeper into the limestone tunnels. They were well-equipped, helmets, backup lights, and years of experience between them. But in cave exploration, even the best-prepared teams can find themselves in life-threatening situations within seconds. At a junction deep in the cave, the team spotted a tight side passage leading to the shoemaker room. Dunleavy had never explored that section, but others described it as a short detour, just 10 or 20 minutes in and out. A quick look, then back. That assumption would prove disastrous. They made a critical decision. They left their packs at the junction. All their emergency gear, extra lights, and rescue equipment stayed behind. It was supposed to be a quick side trip. What could go wrong? 3 team members chose to stay with the gear. Dunleavy and 3 others pressed into the narrow tunnel. The passage was tight, twisting, and unfamiliar. As they advanced, movement slowed. Every foot forward meant more squeezing, more crawling, less visibility. They were counting on a short return, but the cave had other plans. The walls closed in, and the route became more complex. They hadn't marked their path. They were deeper than expected. Behind them, the 3 waiting cavers began to worry. The 20 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. Still, no sign of the others. What had started as a simple detour was turning into a full-blown cave emergency, and the gear they needed most was still sitting at the junction. The passage quickly changed. The walls narrowed, forcing the group to crouch, then crawl. The floor grew uneven, the ceiling lower. Then came the tightest section yet, an 18-inch high crawl, just enough space to slide on their bellies. The ceiling above was a jigsaw of wedged stones, like a giant had drunkenly stacked rubble in midair. It was dangerous, everyone knew it, but one by one, they went in. Dunleavy removed his helmet to squeeze through. With his arms pinned to his sides, he inched forward beneath the loose rock ceiling, every movement slow and deliberate. When he finally emerged, the truth hit hard. The tunnel didn't open into a grand room. It ended in a blank wall. There was no shoemaker room, no chamber, no reward. They had crawled beneath a deadly pile of loose rock for nothing, and now they had to go back the way they came, through the same unstable passage with no gear, no backup, and no room for error. Reality hit hard. They'd risked everything to reach a dead end. Now they had to go back, through the same unstable crawl, but in reverse, an even harder and riskier task in tight spaces. As Dunleavy turned to lead the way out, he got a clear view of what they had just slid beneath. The breakdown above was worse than he imagined. Stacked rocks balanced loosely, like a collapsing house of cards. One wrong move could bring it all down. The three others waited behind him, staring at their only exit with growing dread. Dunleavy began crawling back. Halfway through, the cave responded. A grinding sound tore through the tunnel. A 50-pound rock, disturbed by the vibrations of movement, slipped loose. It dropped directly onto Dunleavy's legs, pinning him in the tightest section of the crawl. The pain was instant. The rock was wedged so tightly that it felt permanent. Now flat on his back in an 18-inch high tunnel, Dunleavy couldn't sit up, roll over, or even shift. He was frozen in place, crushed, trapped, helpless. Behind him, panic set in. The three cavers were now sealed in, cut off by the one person who might have led them out, but he wasn't going anywhere. They shouted his name, but Dunleavy could barely answer. The rock had locked him in, and the tunnel's narrowness meant no one could reach him to help. In one brutal moment, the mission flipped from exploration to survival. They weren't just lost. They were entombed, and the clock was ticking. Dunleavy called back, telling the others to try moving the rock. They crawled forward, wedging into the tight space, reaching for the boulder pinning him down. But it was locked in place, jammed so tightly between other rocks it felt like part of the cave itself. No matter how hard they pushed or pulled, it wouldn't budge. They needed tools, something to break it apart or create leverage. A hammer to shatter it, webbing to lift it. But all their gear was back at the junction, left behind with the packs. The mistake hit them like a punch. They had everything they needed, just out of reach. The decision to leave their equipment suddenly seemed like the worst call they had ever made. Dunleavy managed to shout back toward the entrance, hoping the three cavers waiting could hear him. His voice reached them. They immediately knew something had gone wrong. Two of them ran to alert Mark Engel and the first group. They tore through the passages, trying to stay calm as panic set in. The third, Skye, Fisher, stayed behind, but with Dunleavy blocking the only way forward, there was nothing he could do except talk to them, keep their spirits from collapsing in the darkness. Inside the crawl, Dunleavy's pain was worsening. His leg was crushed, blood circulation was dropping, his muscles began to spasm from the pressure. Worse, the rocks above him weren't finished shifting. Every few minutes, a low groan echoed from the ceiling as the breakdown settled, threatening to collapse further. He couldn't scream. He just had to endure it. But he also knew the truth. If he stayed pinned, the three cavers behind him had no way out. He wasn't just trapped. He was the only thing standing between survival and disaster. After what felt like hours, but was just 30 minutes, one of the trapped team members had a breakthrough. He remembered a small personal pack he'd carried into the crawl, Unlike the main packs left at the junction, this one was within reach, and inside was a coil of rope. It was the first bit of hope since the rockfall. Fisher managed to reach through a gap in the breakdown and pull it out. The rope wasn't long, but it opened the door to a solution. They didn't need to lift the rock by hand anymore. They could use leverage. They began experimenting, threading the rope around the boulder from different angles. If they pulled straight, the rock didn't move. If they angled it right, they got a small shift. Every movement had to be slow, controlled, like performing surgery in a space barely big enough to breathe. One wrong move could cause more rock to fall. Too little force did nothing. Too much might kill them all. Dunleavy, still pinned, guided them through the plan. After several tries, he found a way to shift his body just enough to move the rock a fraction of an inch. That tiny movement created a gap, enough for the others to slide the rope into position. With the rope looped securely, the group worked together in silence, applying pressure from the safest angle they could find. The rock groaned, shifted. Dunleavy gritted his teeth as pain shot through his legs, but he didn't stop. Finally, the boulder lifted. Just enough. He slid his legs free, crushed, aching, but no longer trapped. He was out. It wasn't rescued by strength. It was precision, teamwork, and the one piece of gear they didn't leave behind. The moment Dunleavy freed himself, he didn't hesitate. He scrambled out of the crawl space, expecting more rocks to collapse behind him. The others followed fast. No one wanted to spend another second under that unstable ceiling. They emerged shaken, breathless, and stunned. It felt like surviving a mine collapse. Relief washed over them. At that same moment, Mark Engel and the rest of the group arrived. They found the 4 men huddled near the junction, right beside the packs they had left behind. The emergency gear they had desperately needed was sitting in plain sight, untouched. After a brief rest and a medical check, the group made a surprising decision. They continued the cave tour. No one spoke much. The near miss had left its mark. Later, Dunleavy submitted an incident report. One line stood out. Cavers should never be separated from their packs, but this was only 10 to 20 minutes. We'll be right out. I've heard that many times before, and it bit 4 of us. That line still echoes in the caving community, a reminder that caves don't forgive shortcuts. One small risk, one skipped precaution can turn a simple detour into a deadly trap. In Walmer Cave, they were lucky. They made it out with cuts, bruises, and a hard-earned lesson. But not every caver gets that second chance. The cave doesn't care how experienced you are. It waits for the moment you let your guard down. On the weekend of April 12, 1980, 4 divers from Texas arrived at Bortex Springs in Holmes County, Florida. Ronnie Tyner, Johnny Swan, Merritt R. Stagger, all 24, and Russell D. Hill, 23, had one goal: to explore the water-filled cave system hidden beneath the spring. Bortex Springs was a known destination for cave divers, beautiful, deep, and deadly. By 1980, it had already claimed 24 lives. Just 30 miles away, Morrison Springs had taken 28. These were not beginner-friendly waters. Cave diving was dangerous, one of the most unforgiving forms of underwater exploration, requiring precision, training, and strict safety. But danger didn't deter the curious. The caves drew people in, promising winding tunnels, massive chambers, and a silence unlike anything on land. Divers came from all over, eager to slip beneath the surface and enter a world few ever saw. Tyner, Swan, Stagger, and Hill were no different. Young, confident, and hungry for the challenge. They came prepared. Their gear was checked, their dive plan discussed. They likely stood at the edge of the spring, watching others vanish beneath the water, only to return later wide-eyed with stories of towering rock formations and miles of submerged passageways. The 4 men enter the water, ready to see it for themselves. But in cave diving, even the best preparation doesn't guarantee a safe return. Beneath the surface, the cave system was a maze. Visibility could vanish in seconds. A wrong turn, a missed air check, or a silk cloud stirred by a fin could end everything. They weren't just diving into water. They were entering a place where time, light, and sound disappeared, and the only thing standing between life and death was discipline and a direct route home. The group had some diving experience, but lacked the specialized cave diving certification needed for this environment. Like many before them, they likely felt confident, believing their open water training would be enough. But beneath the surface waited a world that demanded precision, calm under pressure, and flawless execution, qualities even seasoned divers struggle to maintain in a cave. They suited up beside the spring, surrounded by the familiar sounds of preparation, regulators hissing, metal clips clinking. Then, they entered the water. Their descent was quiet, marked only by a stream of rising bubbles. They adjusted gear, equalized pressure, and pushed deeper. Fins stirred the sandy bottom, briefly clouding the water before the steady flow cleared it again. Ahead, the cave mouth yawned open, inviting and ominous. As they moved inside, the daylight behind them faded. Their dive lights flickered to life, casting sharp beams through the crystal-clear water. Walls of limestone glowed in the artificial light, revealing a cathedral of stone carved over thousands of years. With every kick, the outside world slipped further away. The silence grew deeper, the current more steady. They were now inside a place few ever see, and where even fewer return if things go wrong. They had passed the threshold. Now, the cave would decide what happened next. Silence surrounded them, broken only by the steady hiss of their breathing. They moved in formation, staying close, each diver's light cutting through the still water. The cave walls shifted from smooth to jagged, shaped over centuries by flowing water. Roughly 250 feet in, they reached a warning sign, bright letters glowing under their lights. This was the official stop point. Beyond this, only certified cave divers were allowed. The message wasn't a suggestion. It was a final warning. Turn back or risk your life. Many before them had obeyed it. These four did not. They pushed past the sign. At the entrance to the deeper cave system, they tied off a guideline, a thin twine-like material meant to lead them back if visibility failed or panic struck. It was their safety net. But it wasn't proper cave line. Too thin, too fragile. The kind of mistake that only becomes clear when it's too late. They continued into the darkness. Their lights danced across narrow tunnels and high ceilings. The sense of direction faded with each twist and turn. Behind them, the guideline trailed through the cave, flimsy, vulnerable. They were now well beyond the safe zone. What lay ahead would test everything they thought they knew about diving. And that guideline? It wouldn't hold. As they moved deeper, the water grew colder. It seeped through their wetsuits, a chilling reminder of how far they'd left the surface behind. Their lights scanned the rock walls, catching flashes of small fish darting into crevices, the only signs of life in the still, silent cave.
They pushed forward, maneuvering through tight passages. The air in their tanks slowly ticked down. Visibility remained steady, until it didn't. Maybe it was silt stirred by a misplaced fin or a subtle shift in current. Maybe it was panic creeping in as they realized how far they'd gone. Hundreds of feet now separated them from the entrance. Every move mattered. Every breath was a calculation. Then, something went wrong. No one knows exactly what happened, but none of them surfaced. Hours passed. Other divers at the spring noticed their absence and called for help. The sheriff organized a response, and a team of expert cave divers arrived to begin the search. Among them was Johnny Manuel, a veteran of rescue and recovery. He knew what this likely meant. Divers suited up and descended into the same cold void the four men had entered. Their goal? Find them, or what was left. Manuel had seen what caves could do, how quickly they punished the unprepared. This was no longer a rescue. It was a recovery. What rescuers found painted a grim scene. The 4 divers were discovered about 100 feet past the warning sign, tangled in their own guideline, limbs entwined in thin twine, motionless in a knot of chaos. Their knives, strapped to their legs for emergencies, remained untouched. "They were in about as big a mess as I've ever seen," said Johnny Manuel. "That line was all over them. I imagine one got tangled, panicked, and dragged the others into it." The state of their bodies told the rest of the story: panic, confusion, and failed escape. The leading theory? One diver likely lost buoyancy, drifting upward and allowing slack in the line to wrap around him. As he struggled, the line snared him further. The others rushed to help, but in doing so, they were drawn into the tangle. It wasn't a lack of effort or courage, it was the brutal reality of cave diving, where even a single mistake can spiral out of control in seconds. The guideline, meant to be their lifeline, became their trap. By the time rescuers reached them, it was too late. All they could do was recover the bodies and piece together the tragedy. Bortex Springs had claimed again, reminding everyone that the cave does not forgive.
And when ignored, its warnings turn fatal. Another theory points to a critical miscalculation of air. Cave diving demands strict gas planning, enough to go in and more to get back. If they pushed too far, they may have realized too late their air was running out. In desperation, they might have turned the wrong way, burning oxygen and energy. As their tanks emptied, their breathing would have grown heavy. Carbon dioxide built up, triggering a suffocating panic. In those final moments, they may have rushed for an exit, only to get further tangled in the line. Their last breaths likely came with a crushing sense of dread as the reality closed in. A third possibility: light failure. If their primary lights went out and no backups were used, they would have been swallowed by total darkness. In caves, no light means no direction. No way to tell up from down, left from right. Even experienced divers struggle in that kind of blackness. Reaching for their guideline, they might have found it twisted and useless. Whatever the cause, whether it was air, light, or entanglement, the end was the same. Ronnie Tyner, Johnny Swan, Merritt Stagger, and Russell Hill never made it out. Their bodies were recovered, but their story became a warning, one carved deep into the legacy of Bortex Springs. The cave had already taken lives. This tragedy made the count higher, and it reminded every diver of one brutal truth. When a cave says stop, it means it. Ignore the warning, and the cave may never let you leave. The hills of Texas hide dangerous secrets. One of the deadliest lies near Wimberley in Hayes County. Jacob's Well opens like a peaceful spring, but beneath its calm surface is one of America's most lethal underwater caves. On the evening of November 23, 1983, 2 young men would learn that truth too late, a night ending in tragedy and betrayal. Richard Patton, 22, loved diving. Both he and his friend were advanced diving students at Southwest Texas State University. Their instructors called them skilled, intelligent, and fully aware of the dangers of cave diving. They believed they could handle anything. But Jacob's Well was unlike any other dive site. Warning signs surrounded the spring, clearly stating that diving was strictly prohibited. These signs existed for a reason. Many divers had died in Jacob's Well, trapped in its narrow, twisting passages. Despite the warnings, Patton and his friend chose to dive that Wednesday evening. They arrived around 8:30 p.m., carrying standard scuba gear and underwater lights. The water's surface was calm, almost inviting, as daylight faded. They entered the water and began their descent. Jacob's Well drops straight through limestone, forming a deep vertical shaft. As they moved downward, sunlight quickly disappeared, leaving them in darkness lit only by their headlamps. The deeper they went, the more the cave's true danger began to reveal itself. As they descended into the dark limestone shaft, neither diver attached a guideline, a critical mistake. In cave diving, this line is a lifeline. It's the only guaranteed path back to the surface, especially in low visibility. Without it, they were diving blind into one of the most dangerous underwater caves in the world. At around 90 feet, 27 meters below the surface, they reached a key point. A small passage led deeper into the cave. Years earlier, this passage had been sealed with a metal grate after rescue teams failed to recover a trapped diver. Authorities installed the barrier to stop others from venturing into the deadly zone beyond. But when Patton and his friend arrived, they found the grate missing. Someone had removed or destroyed it, leaving the passage wide open. Faced with the choice, the two divers pressed on. The tunnel ahead was too narrow for them to swim with tanks on their backs. They made a risky decision. They removed their tanks, pushed them ahead, and kept their regulators in their mouths to keep breathing. This is a known but dangerous technique. It allows divers to squeeze through tight spaces, but one mistake can quickly turn fatal. The limestone walls closed in around them. Every move had to be precise. The passage seemed to tighten with every push, the rough stone scraping their gear and skin. They pushed deeper into the tight, twisting passage, each foot forward pulling them farther from safety and farther from any chance of turning back. Then, disaster struck. The passage was tighter than they expected. As they pushed through the narrow limestone tunnel, Patton's tank became wedged between the cave walls. They tried to free it, but it wouldn't budge. Their air supply was now reduced to a single tank. They made a fast decision. They would abandon the stuck tank, share the remaining air, and head for the surface immediately. This was buddy breathing, passing the regulator back and forth, taking turns, both completely dependent on the same shrinking air supply. They started their emergency ascent through the winding cave. In the dark, the pressure was on. Every turn mattered. One mistake could cost them their lives. But in their rush, focused on survival and sharing air, they made a critical error. Instead of following the path to the main entrance, they swam into a blind chimney. A blind chimney is a vertical dead end, an upward passage that leads nowhere. As they climbed, their shared air ran low. When they reached the top, they found solid rock. No way out, no surface, just a dead end. Time was gone. Air was almost gone. Faced with the impossible, Patton's companion made the choice that would haunt him forever. He left. With seconds of air left, he abandoned Patton in the blind chimney and swam down, desperate to find the correct exit. It was the worst kind of betrayal, but for him, it was the only chance to survive. In those final moments, Patton was left alone, trapped in the dark, out of air, knowing his friend had left him behind. It was a desperate gamble, one that shattered the trust divers place in each other. But with their air gone and both men facing death, someone had to try. Fighting panic and oxygen deprivation, Patton's companion made it out. He found the correct route, swam to the surface, and burst from Jacob's well, gasping for air and calling for help. But Richard Patton was still trapped, alone, out of air, in a dead-end chamber with no way to escape. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but it was too late. Richard Patton had drowned in the blind chimney, another life claimed by Jacob's Well's deadly maze. On the morning of November 24th, recovery divers entered the cave. They navigated the same tight passages, located Patton's body, and carefully brought him to the surface. The tragedy made headlines across Texas. News reports focused on the loss of a skilled diver who had underestimated the risks of the forbidden cave. The Austin American-Statesman ran the story under the title, "Divers Feel Deadly Fascination for Treachery of Jacob's Well." The spring's quiet beauty had lured yet another diver to his death. For the diving community, it was a brutal reminder. Skill and confidence mean nothing if the cave is unforgiving. The warnings were clear. The dangers were known. But Jacob's Well has a way of pulling people in, offering the thrill of discovery while quietly setting the trap. Richard Patton's story became one more name on a growing list of those who entered but never returned. Cave diving experts later analyzed the incident and identified several key failures that led to Patton's death. First, the missing safety grate. It had been installed years earlier to block access to the most dangerous parts of Jacob's Well. Without it, the passage looked open and passable, even to experienced divers. Second, the choice to remove their tanks. This is a known cave diving technique for squeezing through tight spaces, but it comes with serious risks. Separating from essential equipment can quickly turn deadly if something goes wrong.
When Patton's tank became jammed, the situation spiraled into a life-threatening emergency that demanded flawless execution to escape. But the most critical mistake was this: they never used a guideline. In cave diving, a guideline is everything. It's the diver's only connection back to the entrance. In the dark, twisting tunnels of an underwater cave, even skilled divers can lose their sense of direction within seconds. Had Patton and his companions set a line at the start, they would have had a direct path out. Instead, in the panic, they swam straight into a blind chimney, a fatal mistake. Patton's death wasn't an isolated event. Jacob's Well had already claimed multiple lives over the years, solidifying its reputation as one of the most dangerous dive sites in America. Across the country, water-filled caves continue to claim the lives of divers who misjudge their dangers. The most haunting part? Many of the victims aren't reckless beginners. They're skilled, trained divers, people who know the rules, who understand the risks, but still find themselves trapped in a place that offers no second chances.
In late November 1992, Banshee Hole in Tennessee became the site of a deadly caving accident. The cave, known for its steep 95-foot vertical entrance, was a serious test even for skilled cavers. On this trip, 4 cavers descended the sheer drop into the cavern. One of them was inexperienced, unaware of how much precision and endurance the cave demanded. They used a single rope system anchored at the surface. One by one, they lowered themselves into the darkness, trusting their gear to hold. The first moments inside Banshee Hole passed without trouble. The team explored, their headlamps lighting the way across rough stone and tight passages. The cave stretched around them, a twisting maze of narrow corridors and wide chambers. To keep track of their route, they marked the walls with chalk. The entrance chamber, wide at first, quickly funneled into a steep, narrow corridor that led deeper underground. The walls glistened with moisture, and thin streams of water trickled along the rock, vanishing into cracks below. The group pressed on, moving carefully. Soon, the passage opened into a large chamber with an uneven floor, a mix of slick stone and sharp, broken edges. Every step required caution. Slipping here could have serious consequences. Banshee Hole, silent and unforgiving, was about to show just how dangerous one mistake could be. At the far end of the chamber, a narrow passage appeared, its entrance partly hidden behind a curtain of flowstone. The group paused briefly to rest, but time was tight. Their leader urged them to begin the return. Getting back to the surface would take time and energy. The real challenge came during the ascent. The group agreed to climb one at a time. The least experienced member, the victim, went first. His setup was basic. He'd pieced together an ascending system from instructions found in a flyer that came with his Jumar ascenders. His rig used 2 ascenders, each tied to his feet with slings of different lengths. A chest harness, improvised from webbing, connected to the rope with a carabiner to keep him upright. But the system was missing a key element: a proper seat harness. Without it, he had no support to carry his weight safely. He began his climb slowly but steadily. His companions watched from below, their headlamps tracking his progress as he inched upward. The rope passed through the carabiner at his chest, keeping him upright but offering no relief from the strain. The climb was brutal. When he neared the lip, an overhang 8 to 10 feet from the surface, the situation worsened. The lip required skill. To clear it, a climber had to shift weight, pull hard and use precise technique. The victim struggled. His inexperience showed as his movements grew unsteady and desperate. He tried to push himself over the edge, but without a seat harness to support him, the full weight of his body pulled down against the chest harness. The pressure crushed his chest, restricting his breathing and cutting off circulation. His strength was fading. His system was failing, and he was now stuck, trapped by a rig that couldn't save him. After several failed attempts, the victim's strength began to fade. His arms trembled and his climb stalled. The other cavers quickly understood the danger. 2 of them ascended to help. They tried everything, pulling him over the lip, lowering him back down. But nothing worked. His improvised harness, now reinforced with extra webbing, had become a trap. After nearly 3 exhausting hours, one caver made the hard decision to leave and get help. The others stayed behind, offering support and trying to keep him calm. But the cave's cold crept in. Suspended in the harness, his breathing became shallow and his body sagged. His circulation was slowly being cut off. The Cumberland County Rescue Squad responded quickly. Within minutes of the distress call, they mobilized and arrived at the scene just 40 minutes later. They were skilled at cave rescues, tight spaces, complex rigging, and the intense physical demands. But Banshee Hole was unforgiving. Reaching the victim, they found him suspended in his makeshift system, showing clear signs of physical collapse. His head drooped forward. His skin was pale and clammy. His breathing was labored, his occasional groans signaling a body near its breaking point. The rescuers knew the clock was running out. It wasn't just about freeing him, it was about saving his life from suspension trauma, the deadly effect of hanging in a harness for too long. They quickly began the rescue, setting up proper rigging to relieve the crushing pressure on his chest. The cave's steep entrance, the tight space, and the failing harness left them with little room for error. Every movement mattered, every second counted. The rescue team worked carefully to secure the victim and stabilize his position, preparing to lower him to the ground. They reinforced the harness, making sure it would hold as they maneuvered him. Every move was deliberate, every word precise. They worked in sync, minimizing additional strain on the victim's body. Finally, after a long, tense effort, they freed him from the webbing that had trapped him. Relief was brief. The moment the harness was released, the victim went into cardiac arrest. The rescue team reacted instantly. CPR began right there in the cave. Their voices cut through the silence, counting compressions, delivering rescue breaths, fighting to bring him back. But despite their efforts, they couldn't revive him. The cave, once filled with urgent movement, fell silent. A later investigation confirmed the cause of death. Compression syndrome, also known as crush syndrome, a condition not well understood at the time. When circulation is cut off for too long, the trapped blood becomes toxic, filled with lactic acid, potassium, and dangerous waste. When the pressure is suddenly released, those toxins rush into the body, overwhelming it and causing organ failure, shock, or death. That's what happened here. In 1992, few U.S. cave rescue teams had experience with compression syndrome. The condition was rarely discussed, and the life-saving treatments, saline infusion, specific medications, weren't available on scene. Experts later suggested that if those treatments had been given before the release, the victim might have survived. But in Banshee Hole, in that tight, dangerous space, the odds were always against them. It was a brutal lesson, a tragedy that would later shape rescue training across the country. On February 13, 1994, temperatures in southeastern Kentucky hovered just above freezing. Near Lake Cumberland, 3 teenagers from Cincinnati prepared to enter the Sloans Valley cave system. Brandon Conlon, Joe Van Eaton, and Daniel Hume, all 18, had driven 3 hours to explore the vast underground maze stretching beneath the Kentucky hills. None of them had caving experience. Their gear, a single flashlight, regular clothes, and excitement. No helmets, no backup lights, no food, no extra layers to fight the cave's constant 56 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius temperature. They entered the cave together, leaving behind the cold winter afternoon. After about 30 minutes, Daniel Hume suddenly stopped. Something felt wrong. He turned back, telling his friends he was leaving. Brandon and Joe chose to continue, planning to return in about 2 hours. Daniel exited the cave alone. Inside, Brandon and Joe pushed forward, fascinated by limestone formations and the thrill of discovery. Their single flashlight cast sharp shadows as they explored deeper into twisting tunnels. They kept moving, drawn further by each new passage. They didn't mark their route. They didn't track time. Outside, Daniel sat in the car, with the heater running, watching the cave entrance. 2 hours passed. The winter sun disappeared. Brandon and Joe did not return. Inside the cave, Brandon and Joe realized they had lost their way. The tunnels all began to look the same, smooth walls in some places, jagged in others, but nothing their untrained eyes could use as a landmark. They turned back, or thought they did, moving through passages that felt wrong, unsure which way led out. 3 hours after they'd entered, darkness settled over the Kentucky hills. Daniel remained in the car, occasionally walking to the cave entrance and calling out, then retreating to the warmth of the heater. He didn't try to flag down passing cars. He didn't use his phone. Inside, Brandon and Joe began to panic. Their planned 2-hour trip had stretched far beyond that. Every turn led them deeper into confusion. Still, they believed help would come. They trusted that Daniel, waiting outside, would call for rescue when they didn't return. But the night passed. Morning came. Daniel Hume awoke in the reclined driver's seat, condensation fogging the windows. He wiped a small circle clear, watching the cave entrance from a distance. He got out, stretched, walked a slow circle around the car, then returned to his seat. He didn't call for help. He didn't approach nearby homes. He didn't contact the authorities. Time kept slipping away. Deep in the cave, Brandon and Joe's crisis worsened. Their only flashlight flickered, then died. Complete darkness surrounded them, so total they couldn't see their own hands. They called out, their voices bouncing off walls they couldn't see. They moved carefully, feeling along the stone, trying to retrace their steps, but the maze of branching tunnels trapped them. The cave's cold crept in. Without movement, the steady 56 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius, chilled their bodies. They huddled together, believing rescue would come. Daniel surely had called for help. Someone would find them. Outside, a second night fell. Rain turned to sleet. Temperatures dropped. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed in the car. He woke occasionally, shifted positions, then went back to sleep. He later said he spent most of those 30 hours mostly sleeping in the car. He never called for help. He never looked for assistance. Inside the cave, Brandon and Joe lost all sense of time. They were weak, cold, hungry, and thirsty. Moving became harder. They stayed in place to conserve energy, occasionally calling out, still sure Daniel had gone for help. That belief kept them calm, even as their condition worsened. On the second day, Daniel finally left to get food at a local store. There, he casually mentioned to the clerk that his friends were still in the cave. His tone alarmed nearby customers. One local, realizing the danger, immediately called 911. Rescue teams mobilized quickly. Local cavers joined first responders. They entered the cave with proper equipment: helmets with headlamps, backup lights, first aid kits, food, water, and radios. They moved fast, tracing likely routes based on the cave's layout. Brandon and Joe, still in the darkness, continued calling out. The rescuers heard them. Guided by their voices, the team reached the trapped teens. They were cold, dehydrated, but alive. Rescuers gave them water, food, and warm clothing before leading them out. After more than 44 hours underground, Brandon and Joe stepped back into daylight. They survived, but the missteps were clear. No experience, no equipment, no backup plan, and a friend who didn't call for help. In the end, it was chance, one comment to a store clerk, that saved them. Inside the cave, Brandon and Joe heard distant sounds. At first, they thought it was their minds playing tricks after hours of silence. But the sounds grew clearer, voices calling their names. Then, lights appeared in the distance, moving closer. The ordeal was finally ending. Less than 2 hours into the search, about 400 feet, 122 meters from the entrance, rescuers found them. The two teens were huddled together, weak from hunger and dehydration, but alive. They had spent over 30 hours in total darkness, clinging to one belief, that Daniel would bring help. Rescuers gave them food and water. After a brief rest, Brandon and Joe were able to walk out on their own. Squinting against the daylight, their eyes struggled to adjust after so long underground. Nearby, Daniel Hume stood watching the rescue, showing the same distance he'd displayed throughout the ordeal. When asked why he never reported them missing, his answer stunned the team. "I didn't want to bring a bunch of people out to search, and then they would come out." 3 unprepared kids making bad choices. But others focused on Daniel, his inaction, his cold response, and his refusal to seek help. Why had he left the cave so quickly? Why wait so long, knowing his friends were overdue? And what had he really been doing in those 2 days? He simply said he'd been mostly sleeping in the car. Brandon and Joe only learned the full story after their rescue, that Daniel had done nothing to save them. It changed their understanding of friendship and what it really means when someone says, "I'll be there for you." Investigators found no signs of criminal intent. No charges were filed. Brandon and Joe recovered physically, but friends said something in them had changed, something deeper than just time lost in the dark. The story faded from the headlines, becoming another warning about caving without preparation. But among locals and cavers, questions never fully disappeared. Questions about friendship, questions about responsibility, questions about a young man who knew his friends were unprepared and did nothing when it mattered most. Sloans Valley Cave remains silent, unchanged. Its dark passages hide not just ancient stone, but perhaps the real answer to what happened during those 40 hours. Why Daniel Hume remained silent while time slipped away. Since then, the 3 have gone their separate ways. None of them returned to Sloans Valley Cave. But over the years, local cavers have noticed something. Solitary footprints sometimes appear near the entrance. They lead toward the cave's mouth, stop where daylight fades, then turn back. It was June 2nd, 2004, when 9 teenagers stood at the entrance of Tongue River Cave in Wyoming, excited for what they thought would be a fun, easy adventure. 2 of them, Barry Blaha and Dana Herbert, both just 16, had convinced their friends to explore the underground cave that Saturday afternoon. None of them had ever been caving before, but they felt confident. They believed they could handle whatever was down there. They brought along some cheap flashlights, a few spare batteries, and a couple of headlamps they had borrowed from camping gear. To them, it seemed like more than enough, but they didn't have helmets, no proper safety gear, and absolutely no idea how dangerous caves can get when things go wrong. The group entered the cave one by one, stepping into the darkness with laughter and excitement, already talking about how cool this was going to be. But as they kept going deeper, they came across a web of side tunnels branching off in different directions. Some paths led to dead ends, so they had to backtrack and try another. The deeper they went, the more signs of danger appeared. Cracked walls, loose rocks, and areas that looked unstable, all showing signs of water damage and erosion. To experienced cavers, these would have been red flags. But to these teens, caught up in the thrill of adventure, as they went deeper into the cave, Barry suddenly spotted something the others hadn't noticed. Hidden in the shadows was a thin crack in the wall, barely visible, that seemed to lead even further into the cave. This wasn't on any map. To Barry, this felt like a real discovery. Maybe even something that would make them legends among their friends. The group gathered around the small opening, shining their lights into the tight passage beyond. Right away, they could tell the rock here was different. It looked cracked, unstable, like it was barely holding itself together. Small stones crumbled away at the slightest touch. But the danger didn't register. All the teens saw was excitement, the thrill of discovering something new. Pumped with adrenaline, Barry and Dana decided to go for it. While the rest of their friends stayed behind to check out other parts of the cave, the two of them pushed into the narrow gap. At first, they could twist sideways to get through, but soon they were crawling on their hands and knees. Then they had to slide forward on their stomachs, 1 inch at a time. Their flashlights lit up the cramped space ahead, revealing that the tunnel kept going and getting even tighter. The narrowest part was just 18 inches wide and only 24 inches tall. A tight slot like this would be tough for even trained cavers with full gear. But Barry, who was a bit smaller than Dana, managed to squeeze in first, with Dana following close behind him. Both of them crawling deeper into the suffocating darkness. The narrow walls were pressing in from every side. Barry and Dana had to completely exhale just to inch forward through the tight space. But soon, Barry reached a point where the passage became too small. So tight that no matter how he turned or shifted, his body just wouldn't fit through. The smart thing to do was clear. Back out and try exploring somewhere else. But Barry was a teenager, driven more by excitement and stubbornness than caution. Instead of turning back, he decided to force his way forward by trying to remove the rocks blocking his path. In that cramped, suffocating space, Barry managed to free one arm and grabbed a rock about the size of a softball. It looked like part of the blockage. Without really thinking it through, and with no idea how unstable cave systems can be, he started using that rock as a hammer, hitting the larger stones in front of him, trying to break them apart or knock them loose. With each strike, the sound echoed through the tunnel, and the vibrations rippled through the surrounding stone. Dust started to fall from the ceiling, slowly at first, then more steadily. The cave had stood for thousands of years, undisturbed. But now, Barry's desperate attempts were shaking the very balance that held it all together. Every time Barry struck the rock, he was disturbing the fragile balance of the cave. Each blow sent stress waves through the ceiling above them, already cracked and unstable. And then, the worst happened. A loud, deep cracking sound echoed through the tunnel, like distant thunder. Right after that came the terrifying grinding of stone shifting above them. In an instant, a massive boulder, later estimated to weigh over 300 pounds, broke free from the ceiling and slammed down just behind Dana. The impact was violent. The entire tunnel shook. A thick cloud of dust and debris filled the air, making it hard to breathe or see. And when the dust finally settled, the awful truth hit them. The boulder had completely sealed the passage. Barry and Dana were now trapped in a space barely larger than a coffin. What followed was a nightmare no one should ever experience. Barry was pinned in the tightest part of the tunnel, his chest squeezed so tightly that every breath felt like a battle. Dana was stuck right behind him, her body wedged between his feet and the massive boulder that now blocked any way out. Her breathing turned fast and shallow as panic set in. In an effort to save their flashlights, they turned them off. The darkness that followed was absolute. No light, no movement, just the sound of their heavy breathing, and faintly, the muffled voices of their friends calling from the other side of the rock. Barry and Dana were now buried alive, trapped under tons of rock that could shift and crush them at any moment. Their friends, still in shock, rushed to help, desperately trying to move the giant boulder, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was part of the mountain itself. Every attempt to dig around it only made it more clear. There was no way in, not without help. The sound of their friends scraping at the rock and shouting out in frustration only added to the horror Barry and Dana were facing. Time seemed to stretch painfully slow. Every minute felt like an hour. Inside that tiny space, the stone walls pressed against them from every angle, cutting off circulation and sending waves of pain through their bodies. The air quickly grew warm and stale from their breathing, making every breath feel shallow, never enough. Muscle cramps started to set in from being unable to move. But even worse than the physical pain was the fear. Thousands of tons of rock sat above them, and in the darkness, every tiny sound felt like a threat. The faint shifting of stones, the slow drip of water, or the eerie scratching of some unseen creature nearby. It all fed the rising panic, trapping their minds just as much as their bodies. Barry and Dana didn't know how long they'd been trapped. All they could do was wonder, is this where it ends? Would their bodies ever be found? Meanwhile, their friends made the most important decision of the day. They turned back and ran for help. Some of them rushed out of the cave and immediately called emergency services. The alert went out to Sheridan County rescue teams, who knew right away this wouldn't be an ordinary mission. Rescuers began preparing specialized equipment, powerful winches, hydraulic jacks, and tools made for exactly this kind of nightmare. But even with all that gear, the job was nearly impossible. Moving a 300-pound boulder inside a narrow, fragile cave wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. Only 1 or 2 rescuers could reach the work site at a time. Every tool had to be carried by hand, deep into the winding cave. And with the cave's unstable structure, every single movement had to be slow and carefully planned. One wrong move could cause another collapse. Hours passed. It became a race against time. The longer Barry and Dana stayed trapped, the more dangerous their condition became. Restricted breathing, muscle compression, even hypothermia. Every minute raised the stakes. Finally, after what felt like forever, rescuers managed to position the winch system around the massive stone. It took extreme precision and teamwork. Slowly, inch by inch, they pulled the boulder out of the way. When Barry and Dana could finally move, the relief was overwhelming. But their bodies were stiff and cramping from being stuck for so long, and every motion brought pain. Rescuers carefully helped them out of the tight passage. They finally emerged from Tongue River Cave around 10:30 p.m., almost 8 hours after they first entered, thinking it would be just a fun little adventure. Near the well-known Glenwood Caverns in Colorado lies a cave system with tight passageways and dangerous rock formations. On Saturday evening, March 20th, 2004, Rob Galsby, 38, and 2 other experienced cavers set out to push deeper. Their mission was to continue digging at the far edge of the cave, hoping to connect it to a larger system. This wasn't casual caving. It was demanding, technical work that required focus, skill, and complete trust in their equipment. Using a homemade ladder from a previous trip, the team descended 80 feet into the cave's entrance. The darkness swallowed them quickly, cutting them off from the fading evening light. On the cave floor, they carefully crossed 200 feet of rugged ground called Breakdown Passage. It was rough terrain, loose rocks, sharp edges, and sudden drops at every step. The cold, heavy air pressed around them, forcing a tight, single-file march through narrow gaps. Their final push involved a 20-foot handline climb, gripping ropes to pull themselves up toward the next level. Every move had to be precise. In this cave, mistakes carried weight. The climb was tough, physically exhausting, even for experienced cavers. At the top, they reached their target, a narrow fissure, barely wide enough to squeeze through. This was their next dig site, the place they hoped would open a new path to the larger cave system. It was risky, but essential if they wanted to move forward. Gillespie took the lead, stopping to study the fissure. It was a body-sized gap, just enough to slide through if he kept his arms tight to his sides. He adjusted his helmet, his headlamp casting a faint beam across the rock. He'd handled tight spaces before, but this one left no room for mistakes. Carefully, he eased into the fissure, angling his shoulders and torso forward, inching ahead. Every movement was a struggle, battling friction and the steep descent. Suddenly, his foothold collapsed. He slid a few inches and felt it immediately. He was stuck. His left arm had shifted, trapped beneath his body at a painful angle. A solid rock pressed against his right knee, locking his leg in place. The walls closed around him, holding him from every side. He tried to push himself up, but his pinned arm offered no support. The rock's pressure was unrelenting. No space, no leverage. Gillespie was trapped completely. He tried to pull himself back, but the rock wouldn't let go. The crevice locked him in a crushing grip. His breathing quickened as he realized his options were slipping away. He called out. His companions scrambled to help, but the narrow tunnel only allowed one person at a time to reach him. They tugged at his legs, shifted his body, and tried to ease the pressure on his trapped knee, but nothing worked. The rock held firm. Time dragged on. The cold crept into his body, seeping through his clothes, draining his heat. Pinned against the stone, he began to lose feeling in his limbs. His body was going numb. The pressure made breathing harder, and the tight walls around him turned his isolation into something overwhelming. Communication grew difficult. Voices faded in and out. By 7:30 a.m., after hours of failed attempts, his condition worsened. One of his companions made the decision, leave the cave and get help. It was the only chance left. Gillespie stayed behind, trapped, his body growing colder, his strength slowly slipping away. He found Tim Ray, a caver with rescue experience, just arriving at Glenwood Caverns for his morning shift. Ray moved fast, contacting Steve Beckley, the cavern's owner, who quickly reached out to the Colorado Cave Rescue Network and the local fire department. Within hours, a rescue team was on the way, armed with drills, wedges, and rock-breaking tools. They relieved Ray and the cavers, taking over the rescue effort. Working in shifts, they focused on widening the narrow passage, but the rock refused to give. They drilled, chipped, and hammered, but each piece removed felt like nothing against the solid, unyielding cave walls. Time kept slipping away. Gillespie's condition worsened. By midday, the signs were clear. Hypothermia was setting in. His body, pressed against the cold stone for hours, couldn't hold its heat. His breathing grew shallow. His skin turned pale. He began to shiver uncontrollably. Nausea hit, then vomiting followed. His body was breaking down. The strain was too much. His voice, once steady, became faint, confused, and hard to understand. The rescuers kept working, but the cave was relentless, and Gillespie's time was running out. The human body, trapped without warmth, water, or food, breaks down fast. Hypothermia and dehydration were draining Gillespie's strength. After nearly 16 hours, a breakthrough finally came. At around 4:10 p.m., Daniel Ella, the smallest and most agile rescuer, managed to squeeze deep into the fissure, reaching Gillespie at last. The space was crushingly tight. La had to move with extreme care, his body barely fitting inside. Once in position, La gently worked Gillespie's trapped arm free, shifting his body just enough to create a small backward slide. Inch by inch, Gillespie pulled himself out of the rock's grip. The relief was instant, but his body was weak, numb from the cold, exhausted from the ordeal. Rescuers quickly offered warm food and drink, massaging his arm to restore circulation and letting him rest as his strength slowly returned. When he was finally ready, the rescue team supported him for the long, careful climb out. Every step was a challenge. Gillespie's body battled fatigue and dehydration. His companions stayed close, guiding him through the breakdown passage, stopping often so Gillespie could recover and hydrate. Step by step, they pushed toward the surface. Finally, just after 5:30 p.m., Gillespie emerged from the cave, stepping into the fading daylight. He was battered, drained, but alive. 16 hours trapped inside one of Colorado's tightest caves, and he survived. His rescue became a powerful reminder of the risks cavers face underground, and of the incredible effort and determination it takes to bring someone back.